For 15 years, you have spoken about the challenges that will come with Muslim immigration to Europe. Mm-hmm. Is there a certain naivety in the Western way of thinking in which we tend to believe that everybody wants to become like us?
It's more than a naivete, it is wishful thinking. So we have here two different mentalities, two different consciousnesses that are growing in the same society. We have two cultures, so it's not multiculturalism, it's anti-culturalism. The people who don't understand the basic values of Europe that have developed in Christianity within the last 2,000 years. So they come in the last 50 years and they want to reverse everything. And if you don't dare to reverse it, or if you resist the reversal, you are a racist because you don't accept ours. So it's a certain way of thinking that Europeans simply do not understand. And I have to add to this one very crucial point. You know that there are more Muslims going to the mosques in London, Amsterdam, and Lille in France every Friday than Christians do to churches on Sundays. Already that situation. And you know, because to be religious has become a sin, it's not fashionable anymore. Young people don't care about church or going. They lost the cause of life. They lost the purpose of life. And that's the reason also why the Europeans don't rear children. They make one child per family. Even Spain and Italy, which are Catholic, which used to have the highest birth rate in Europe, now have 1.5 or 1.6, which means that they cannot even maintain the same level of population, and they are shrinking. You shrink, you don't have many children when you don't think that life is worth living or is worth fighting for. They say in jest, of course, that if a European family wants to have a child, it's only in order for the dog or the cat to have somebody to play with. And that's very sad.
The hope in multicultural Europe has been that as Muslim minorities stay in the country for the second and the third generation, the European culture will permeate into their being, and one would not have the situation that one sees today, that precisely second and third generation rejoin the Jihadi groups and also cause a lot of trouble at home. Why hasn't the change come about?
Well, the main reason is that, as I said before, these young people who were born and grew up in Europe are educated not by the school system, which is European, and it could inject into them European thought. But they were permitted, in the name of multiculturalism, to go to schools in Urdu or in Arabic or whatever, paid by the government. So these people, and besides, they get some education in Sunday schools and so on at home, which is a religious Muslim and so on. So these people are really imbued with the original culture of their country, and they keep respecting it. I can give you an example. During my field work, I was in Sweden to write this book, and they have every Sunday a market, open market. So I went to the market. There were Arabs from North Africa. I talked to them Arabic. They were delighted. We talked and so on. And they said, how are you happy here? They said, it's fantastic. Sweden gives us all the facilities, homes and social welfare and food and jobs and blah. I said, great. So you should be very happy that you are here. He said, no, there is only one problem that bothers me. He said, now I am a Swede and I cannot take the Swedish flag, which has a cross on it, as my national flag. So I said, so what do you want? You come here as a refugee, they take you in, they give you all those goodies, and you want to oblige them to change their national symbols? That's what you expect? He said, yes, I can't accept it. I am a Swede like all the others.
You are one of the leading experts in the Middle East on suicide bombings and Islamic kaze. And we're here with one of your books. You've been writing over 40 books for many years on this issue. To us Europeans, it's such a different statement when we hear Hamas say, we wish for death as you wish for life. How can this be explained?
Well, even the Hamas, when they say that, they don't really mean that, because everybody instinctively wishes to live, not to die. But it needs an explanation, because they are usually underdogs. In their confrontation with the West or with Israel, they lose all their wars and so on. So they say that this, what you call by error, suicide bombing, I'll explain why it is by error, is our nuclear arms. Because this is something that the West can do nothing against it, because they never know who will come from where and blow up in their minds. And therefore, as a nation develops nuclear weapons, they develop their culture of death. So this is to take into consideration. Now in Islam, as in other cultures, to commit suicide is forbidden by Islamic law, because the soul belongs to Allah. And therefore you cannot unilaterally decide to take it from the possession of Allah. Only He can decide what is. And therefore what they developed is their new literature of what I call the Islamic kaze. Why Islamic kaze? Islamic kaze is obviously the mixture of Islam and kamikaze. Because the kamikaze in World War II, when Japanese with their airplanes were crashing on American aircraft carriers in the Pacific, they did not commit suicide. Because if you want to commit suicide, you do it in the comfort of your home. You don't need to go somewhere in the middle of people who can disturb you. So this is obviously not suicide, especially that it is forbidden, as I said, in Islam. The kamikaze did it for their country, for the emperor. And therefore they went not to kill themselves, they want to crush the American aircraft carriers, which endangered the security of Japan. In other words, it's some kind of ultimate weapon, then they can do it. And you will notice that in both Japanese and Islamic culture, not the will to kill oneself is the prevailing motive, as I say, but the damage they can do to others, even if in the process they have to sacrifice themselves. And therefore in Islam, you will understand, it's called self-sacrifice. It's not suicide bombing, and this is a big difference. And therefore this is what everybody has to understand, that when Hamas or any other extremist Islamic does this, what we call suicide, and it's, again, I repeat, erroneous, it's an Islamic act of killing others while being ready to sacrifice oneself. Because when you sacrifice yourself in the middle of killing the enemy, of causing damage to the enemy, then you become a shaheed, a martyr. And to become a shaheed is an honor, because you go straight to sit near the throne of God in heaven. Martyr, direct. And therefore they say, in that regard, you see what it means. We hate life and we want death. Because what do they have in life? Most of them are poor, backward, with disease and hunger and dictatorial governments they live under. So there is no great fun to live in this world. But if they are a shaheed, they take the shortcut to heaven directly. So why sit here and suffer? If you can, by doing an act, you push a button and you go straight to paradise with the 72 virgins and to live happily ever after. So this life is miserable and therefore we hate it. That life in paradise, that's the real life and therefore we want it. So even though it sounds like an attractive slogan, it has a meaning, and we have to understand it. What is the meaning of this story? And in that regard, you can say it's expanding, because the first to do that were the Shiites. Shiites in Lebanon, they did it against the Americans and so on. But others like Hamas, which is Sunnite, and other Sunnite groups, learned from that. They said this is very effective as a tool of struggle against Israel, Zionism, the Americans, the West, and so on and so forth, if it is useful, so we can adopt it. And therefore, little by little, it spread to other Islamic movements, Sunnites, which have nothing to do with the Shiite, and it is used today from ISIS to Hamas, and from Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria to Boko Haram in Africa.
Where do you think the jihadi culture is going in the Middle East, and how do you see the future regarding this?
Well, look, the push to jihadism, to Islam, was influenced by two major events. We have to remember that in the 60s and 70s. 60s, the big defeat they had in 1967 in the war with Israel, where the entire Islamic world combined against this little state, and they were beaten like they were never in Islamic history. And they sit there and wonder, what happens? This tiny nation can beat all this big Muslim universe and so on. And they convened, even in Cairo, they had a conference on that in 1968, a year later, and their scholars came to the conclusion Islam was glorious and expansive and all that when we were very loyal to the rules of Islam in the beginning. But as time went, the West, of course, there is somebody else always to blame, not themselves. The West occupied us, introduces wrong Western values. They call that Westoxication, Western intoxication together. They corrupted our youth. We lose, and this is the result, that even this miserable little nation like Israel we cannot overcome. And that caused a tremendous return to Islam in all the Islamic world. If we should, and you had groups of Muslims coming up and so on and so forth. This is one thing. And the other thing is the fall of the Soviet Union. And this fall of the Soviet Union, beginning from 1989 and on, 1990s, from their point of view was caused by two things. One, communism, which is anti-God, and therefore it was dismissed. And when this big superpower went down, and other communist nations, then communism all over the world, including in the Arab countries where there were communists, in Israel, the biggest Arab party was the Communist Party. Suddenly there became a vacuum. This big power went, then what do you do instead? And that was exactly the vacuum that Islam found and came in. Oh, you see, don't trust this big power, don't trust nationalism, ruled by dictators in all Islamic countries. We have Islam, which wants to bring back the caliphate, to unite all Muslims and so on. So it sounds promising.
Thinking about Europeans and how we 60 to 70 years ago took to war and removed the groups we didn't like at the time, how do you see the chances of civil wars coming in Europe due to the problems of the different cultures migrating to Europe?
Well, I tell you, Marine Le Pen in France is heading towards direction. And all these right-wing parties growing in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Germany, I think, will bring about a course of collision, because as the masses of these Muslim migrants become more numerous, and they are becoming numerous by the day, they pose a growing danger to these natives, native Europeans who started to see the danger. But so far, they were helpless. They couldn't do anything. Now, with the lead of those right-wing parties which are winning elections and growing in every election, then they will perhaps finally say, if we don't expel them from here, we are stuck forever with them, and therefore that course of collision might very well create things that I don't know if civil war, but certainly violence.
How do you see the future in Europe?
Well, I have something good and something bad to say. The something bad is, of course, it does not augur well for the demographic situation in Europe. And more than that, I think that after World War II, Europe has lost its will to live and to fight for its ideas and so on. So they always borrow the easiest way to get out of a difficult situation. The European population has been doing demographically very badly. That's the bad side. The good side is, and that is one of the reasons why the EU was enlarged from 12 to 27, is precisely to add Christians from Eastern Europe, and there are Polish and Romanians and so on and so forth, and they flood Western Europe. So there are these two trends working together. Which one will win ultimately, who knows?